Okay, two final things. This is about this is from last week about these authorizations of these bombs to Israel. They have been approved a long time ago by Congress, but looks like the State Department has decided to do the transfers last week, the week before. Why was that decision taken, like, recently?
So I think it would be helpful to step back and put this in a little context. And the context is that the United States has a decades-long commitment to Israel's security. Israel is surrounded by entities that are sworn to its destruction, not just Hamas, but Iran and proxy groups that Iran sponsors, Hezbollah among them, who have repeatedly talked about their desire for the destruction of Israel. We believe Israel has every right to defend itself against those opponents, and we, to that end, have a long-standing security relationship with them where we provide them more than $3 billion annually in security assistance. Now, the way that works, and I know you preface this in your question, but just for the benefit of everyone else, the way that works is we provide them with $3.3 billion a year in security assistance. They don't always draw all of that down in any given year, but they come to the United States, request certain defense articles. We make assessments about whether those are appropriate or not. We notify them to Congress in the regular course of business. And oftentimes what happens, let's say, just as an example, this is a fictional example, let's say they requested 100 planes. We make a decision, we notify Congress. That doesn't mean that they take 100 planes tomorrow once that notification has been given and once the approval has been given. They draw those down over time, and sometimes it takes years to fulfill those requests. And so those are the types of things that I see you wanting to go. Bear with me. I know this is long, and then you'll have the opportunity for follow-up. Those are the types of things that often take years to fulfill. And they were happening before October 7th, and they have continued after October 7th. So what these are about, in many cases, are about self-defense, but also deterrence and replenishment. And so we make these in the regular course of business. And what I can tell you about them is that we follow the same procedures with respect to everyone that we do for every other country in the world, which is that we notify Congress. And in fact, since October 7th, we have gone above and beyond to notify Congress about these transfers. There is a statutory threshold where we are required to notify them of transfers. We have been regularly briefing the committees to make them aware of every transfer that we are making.
So I'm going to have to combine my questions now that you've taken up so much time with that answer. I understand.
I would apologize, but I don't think you'd believe it.
I'm just joking. Of course, take your time. I understand the fulfillment can take years, but are you basically saying that the authorization of the transfer coming in these recent weeks was a coincidence?
I'm not saying it's a coincidence. Israel has been engaged in a military conflict, and of course, when you are engaged in a military conflict, you deplete your military stocks.
So there was a request in recent weeks for the additional fulfillment of these particular
I'm not going to get
weapons.
As is always the case, I'm not getting into the timings of exact requests from here. I'll be quick. But this is a process that we keep Congress fully apprised of, our relevant committees. But when you see these types of requests and when they get publicly reported, you have to remember that Israel is in an armed conflict and is expending a great deal of defense material, and some of that needs to be replenished for Israel's long-term security.
Right. And my final thing on this is, like, Secretary and a lot of senior officials from this administration basically said far too many Palestinians have been killed. But when you go and and we know that the administration's policy hasn't changed, it is not conditioning weapons to Israel, but when you go and make such an authorization of the transfer in recent weeks, even if the actual weapons transfer has been approved years ago, don't you think that is going to damage the weight of your word, your credibility, and basically your sincerity in saying that far too many Palestinians have been killed?
I do not agree with that at all. We have been very clear that we want to see Israel do everything it can to minimize civilian casualties. We have made clear that they need to operate at all times in full compliance with international humanitarian law. At the same time, we are committed to Israel's right to self-defense, and this is a long-term commitment the United States has made, that it made before October 7th, and that continues it continues since October 7th. So obviously the fight in Gaza is connected to Israel's long-term security in very substantial ways. I got into some of that with response to Matt's question. But Israel still faces, in addition to the security challenge posed in Gaza, it still faces an Iran that is hostile to Israel. It still faces Hezbollah on its northern border that is hostile to Israel and says it is committed to the destruction of Israel. And so we are going to continue to support Israel's ability to defend itself against those sworn enemies that want to see it end as a modern state or a state at all.
Just to follow up, a 2,000-pound bomb is self-defense, in your opinion?
So they need to have the ability to defend themselves against a very well-armed adversary. Like I said, Iran, Hezbollah, which has thousands and thousands of fighters and quite sophisticated material and quite sophisticated weaponry, as we've seen them deploy, against Israel in the last few days. So yes, they do need the modern military equipment to defend themselves against those adversaries.
In Gaza before, in the beginning in Gaza.
And we have made clear to them that whatever weapon they use in Gaza, be it a bomb, be it a tank round, be it anything, that we expect them to use those weapons in full compliance with international humanitarian law. And we have had very frank conversations with them about the fact that far too many civilians have died through their operations, and that they need to do better in taking into account the need to minimize civilian harm, and we'll continue to do that.
On that point, the requests were done years ago, what have you, but this time around you're suspiciously very careful not to publicize it. Usually you do the notifications to Congress, you do a statement, what have you. But this time, I understand you didn't need to do it because it was passed. But
I just say we did notify Congress.
I know. You didn't publicize it.
So it is
usually you do on arms sales and all that. You publicize it.
So that's not true with respect to most arms sales around the world. I know people have gotten used to the tempo of arms sales with respect to Ukraine, but that is a very different situation than our arms sales to Israel or any other country with which we have a security relationship, because we stood it up from nowhere right before an active war, where most of our security relationships, we don't publicize our ongoing sales. What we do is we notify Congress about those sales, and we have done that with respect to these sales to Israel, as we do with respect to sales anywhere in the world.